Welcome to the 5th episode of the Interstice podcast. We are rolling along now. Today we're going to do, the first half will be dedicated to some different cultural discussions, stuff like that. And then the second half, as I did in the previous episode, will be given over to answering some questions on this, that, and the other thing that have been emailed to me about life in Japan. Priority has been given to the people on my Patreon, but of course, if I can get through those, I'll answer any questions that are sent to me. So for as little as $1, you can join up on Patreon and guaranteed to have your question answered and get a bunch of other great things that are there. And if not, I appreciate so much the interaction on the channel and in the podcast for people to write me at davetrippanon@gmail.com. It's the email address I have available on my YouTube channel if you would like to have your question answered here. So with that now out of the way, let's get into the discussion. So I thought always an interesting topic, and especially so when you're living in a monoculture, is a discussion of race and racism. And I've actually gone and looked up because I wanted to be perfectly accurate here when I discuss this, because it's a nuanced thing, kind of like that there are no black and white exact versions of our perceptions of each other, and where they start to dip in towards racism as opposed to something like an honest misunderstanding can be kind of fuzzy. So looking it up here, it says racism is the belief that race accounts for difference in human character or ability, and that a particular race is superior to others. It's also discrimination or prejudice based on race, and the belief that each race has a distinct and intrinsic attribute or attributes. And so I should start by saying, in a totally unsexy and unexciting way, that actually for myself, and also very hopeful way, my experience in Japan, I've had nothing. I get asked that question where a lot of people say, what is your experience? Personally, your subjective experience, that it relates to you. What have you had? And I've had none of it. I've really only felt welcomed here. I felt that people are curious about my life and where I'm from. But that's not to say that I've never ever experienced before, because I've had friends of all different shades and colors. And just like the South Park game has taught us, life can so often be more difficult depending on how much more dark your skin is. And hearing about their experiences has given me some kind of reflection on what it might be like to experience something like that here. And the reason I wanted to so immediately look up the term racism before I started talking about racism in Japan is because I think not that the end of this is very innocent, but most of us, I would say most roots of racism come from a misunderstanding and a lack of experience. And at best, we are innocently and ignorantly filling in the spaces of our knowledge with assumptions and hearsay. And at the worst of this, we're filling those assumptions with really hateful things that are damaging, as opposed to kind of blissfully ignorant and harmless to misunderstand. And I also wanted to look at this because discrimination based on race, the funny thing that I find in Japan is that a lot of what I see discrimination, or not even discrimination at an innocent level, let's call it a misunderstanding, is basically related to the fact that a lot of Japanese people make assumptions based on their holes in their knowledge of the country that you're from. And so I was thinking, now, race is, of course, quite intrinsically linked to where you're from, unless maybe you're from Canada, because there's so many races there. Like, what's a Canadian? It's anything. It's literally, you can walk down Vancouver and hear like 12 different languages being spoken. So it's a little fuzzier with like that kind of country. But sure, when you're thinking about other countries and you think about, let's say, somewhere like Ethiopia, Uganda, of course, you're going to have an obvious assumption about someone being black who's from there. And say you're from the Philippines, or say you're from, I don't know, Southeast Asian country, then it's a lot easier, because these countries, much like Japan, are monocultures. And, well, monocultures, I said it's more like monoethnic, I suppose you might say. They're very strictly that one group of people. Like the Japanese are, for the most part, totally Japanese. When you think Japanese, you don't think of a cultural mosaic. And so what I see at the innocent level when I've had experience with it is someone making assumptions like, oh, well, you must love ice hockey and you must love maple syrup, which one of these things is true. I do love maple syrup. It's wonderful. Although I prefer actually the cheap shit. I like the like Aunt Jemima's like butter flavored garbage. I like the viscosity of it. This is such a Canadian tangent talking about syrup for a minute. Anyways, those are harmless, but then I've seen now assumptions are then made on the wealth of the country. So I think the Japanese, where they kind of erroneously run into problems, is where they might assume that if you're a darker skin, that you are from a poorer country, therefore your educational system is inferior, therefore assumptions are made regarding your intelligence based on the education. And I wouldn't give somebody a free pass for assuming that because a country is poorer, then its population is more ignorant, although that sort of seems reasonable at a glance, but you don't know the personal experiences of everyone. That's the whole point about not making that assumption. But then what it leads to, where it gets ugly, is where the guy that I would tell these stories about, who is a brother from another mother kind of dude, the guy I've mentioned in previous podcasts, his name's Chopper, who is ethnically Indian, but is a British Indian, where with him and I, there would be assumptions made about language, because I assume when they saw his darker skin, they thought he was from a poor country, because that can often be the case, and then erroneously made the assumption that I must be much better at Japanese because I'm white-skinned, probably coming from a wealthy country, therefore my education is better. Therefore, of course, I would naturally speak the language better, it's prejudiced. It is wrong. And I really felt for him in those situations, especially because, I mean, the whole point of this being, even if their assumption is right or wrong, the assumption that they've made in this case is especially egregious because Chopper was excellent at Japanese and a really altruistic, kind soul who helped me out in a number of different situations when I'd first arrived in Japan and needed the assistance of somebody who spoke the language a lot better. And so I really, really felt for him there. And he would also comment, now this one I can't say, I don't know how much this actually is real. This has nothing to do with education. This would just be pure prejudice. But he said that he noticed when I was driving that people would always let me into traffic. And when he was driving, they wouldn't. And I was like, I don't know, maybe, because I wonder as well, there can be where you start to like look for where you've been, where somebody has violated you in some way once you've already been violated. You're hypervigilant, I suppose is the point that I'm making at that, where maybe I wondered if he might be imagining things. Are people really letting me into traffic more? But I think with all things, discussing the problem now, how it relates to gaps in our understanding and gaps in our experience of each other, is usually the best cure for all of this is always, at a glance, you would say the word education, but I don't know if education is necessarily the right word. Education just, I think it's closest to being the truth when it refers to knowledge in general. If we were all more knowledgeable, we wouldn't make these assumptions so much about each other. And that's why I think that without eroding the parent culture that already exists here in Japan, I do think that obviously international exposure is a really, really great thing for a country like Japan that still is so monoethnic that they don't get exposure. Like, say, if you grow up in Canada, it's a lot harder to other people because everyone around you is some other, but is the same in some sense because you all share the fact that you're Canadian. And so I think that the efforts, and there are efforts to be more international, are really, really good. And I know that, for example, say what you will about the JET program, that the JET program is really international. And I can't say always that the basis of why programs are created are purely good. Maybe the JET program is quite political because it's ramped up so much as a result of the 2020 Olympics. But if the fallout of a political act is something that's really positive, I don't want to fault that. So I think that as there's increased, as there's increased exposure to a greater global community, that I think naturally you would see less of this, because most of where it comes from before it becomes ugly is that, like I said from the start, that people don't have any experience with that ethnic group. And so they make these assumptions where if you know what a Filipino person looked like as opposed to somebody from Thailand, then you'd be able to have a much more nuanced understanding of what their cultural differences are, and what kind of people generally, and what strengths and weaknesses that they might have given their country. Another experience where I can't say, I think this is like old school, basically countryside Japan, where it's like Bill Burr has a really good way of stating this, where he's referring to like somebody saying something racist on TV, and it was like this really, really old dude. And he made the point, he's like, what did you think that he was going to say? Where I'm not saying that we should forgive people of their racism necessarily because they're older, but I think we could at least understand it more in the fact that it was the world was unquestionably, the further back you go, it's more racist. And so when you come across somebody who is racist, who is a little bit older in Japan, well, that shouldn't, you wouldn't want to clutch your pearls and be like, oh, I'm so shocked that they would behave in that way, because that's how things were. It's more about having your eyes open than it is about condemning someone for not being up with the times, where it's the world they live in. We are in our subjective experiences, and that's where that person has existed their whole life. And isolated in the countryside, it's not so strange that they retain those beliefs even now, when people are probably obviously more open-minded. But it was sad. It was another, when I think about the experience that he had, because he was making, this is a racist experience with Chopper, where he was trying to get new housing. He was thinking about whether or not he would stay in Japan, and he was looking for a house. And he had a couple experiences with people where he speaks the language so well, but he could not get someone to rent a house to him in the old area that we used to live in. And I cannot help but feel that people of other skin tones, perhaps if it was some white dude going in there, I think there'd be probably some resistance. Just because you don't get a free pass just because you're white. But I think it is unquestionable that darker skinned people in Japan, less favorable assumptions are made about, which is essentially, when I look at this here, I'm like, whether it's based on the country you come from and that means your race, or your race directly, that's racism. So I really felt for him when he couldn't find a place. And obviously he could have persevered. He did eventually make that call where he thought, forget this. I've had enough struggling trying to find a place. And that's on him in the end. Ultimately, his destiny is his own. I don't think he's so oppressed that he couldn't have eventually found a place. But it doesn't lessen the sting that he would have experienced and felt what he did in the moment, where he speaks the language well, he's got a good job. Everything, if you read off of paper, would mean that you would provide this guy with a place to live. He's been a good tenant elsewhere, so on and so forth. So that does sting, and I try and empathize with the guy for those experiences there, but not always to put a positive spin on things. But I really do think that more and more, most places in the world, it's a really ugly time right now around the world. You look at Bolivia, is it Chile as well? If you look, and obviously going on in Hong Kong, it's ugly. But I feel like, well, we have these uglinesses. I mean, those are even a result of people being fed up, and I don't know if they get big brothered. I don't know if they get rolled over at the end of it, but at least people are they're saying that they won't stand for this kind of oppression, whether it's by like a political power above them, or there's people who are younger are saying, this kind of like blind prejudice against each other is the way that we would no longer live. There's a movement, whether it's politically, I would say, or politically for your country, or for race and equal rights and progressiveness. Not always in line. Sometimes the pendulum swings too strong in the other direction, where it's like, whoa, too progressive, too crazy. Now you're creating another form of exclusion. Everything at its extreme resembles exactly the thing that it initially opposed. How ironic. But I think net positive, no matter the uglinesses we see around us, I think it's all improving. And I don't see, as much as I see the human spirit as flawed, absolutely, it's flawed and it's got a dark nature to it. I think that we equally as much are made. We are made of both parts. There's the yin and the yang. We've got the dark. We've got the light, and they can coexist with each other. I think they are necessarily a part of each other. And while the pendulum swings, an opinion from one side to the other, as we like eventually move towards something that's better for everyone, we'll get there if we don't blow the planet up. That's where we're heading. But yeah, line of hope, I say at the end, not for myself if I ever experienced it, but I don't want to be blind because I've seen others, and I think genuinely there is great hope for the future, because at our core we seem to be moving towards a more inclusive, more understanding, more empathetic way of living in every single country in the world. And Japan's doing a pretty good job of it, although constantly repeating this kind of mantra of never be blind, that there's obviously improvement to be made here. And I really felt for when I saw Chopper going through these things. So yes, racism in Japan, discrimination in Japan, absolutely a real thing. Absolutely a real thing. The next topic, let's get a little bit lighter now, where I thought would be useful for people listening to this or just curious about moving to Japan, where often the topics here are teaching. We're going to discuss how to get over here, what my time was when I arrived. But a big part of that, kind of linked to once I'd been here a little while, was getting a new home, because we all know, most of us know about Leo Palace, and Leo Palace is basically where you put foreigners when they first come over into Japan, and that's what many of these large dispatch companies will do. They prearrange your housing, and you would go into a Leo Palace, and they have some benefit to them in that all your fees are included. So they're 9 times out of 10 more expensive than they should be. But I would say in terms of overall value, for the fact that you're having to plan nothing and somebody can take care of it for you, it's actually not so shitty as you might think. But then people want to move on. People want to live in a different place. People want to get more for their money. And I wanted to talk about the kind of like the moving process, what you can do, the couple of different sites that I'm aware of that have been in the past very handy. One's called sumo.jp or .com. You can just look these up, like sumo housing, and you'll find something in Japan. And then the other one is homes.co.jp, I believe. And they're great fun, if only. I always find looking at different houses like very, very entertaining. And when you search on these sites, you can essentially look for like neighborhood. You can look for line that you're going to be on. You can search by all these different factors, like, and the details that you can go into when you're looking at houses in Japan for the actual home itself is very extensive. Whether it's like, not only could you look up if you wanted an aircon in the house, but you can search how many aircons you have in the house. You can search the size, obviously, if it's got tatami rooms. You can search. There's a lot of little qualifying factors that you might like, which you can search by if you use either of these two sites. Now, I thought it'd be cool here to bust a few myths about Japanese housing. I thought this would be a good segue going on from Chopper having such difficulty with housing. That you can, where everybody thinks when you come to Japan that the only housing that you're going to find is the kind of housing where you have to pay key money and you have to pay, what are some other figures? Sometimes, well, just these additional fees. And the most significant, the most prominent among them is absolutely key money. If you go on homes.co.jp or you go on to Sumo, you can actually search by not having key money. And this doesn't have to limit itself to being out in the countryside. You can find these places in Tokyo. And if you can find them in Tokyo, then you can find them in any major city all over the country. So you can always find a good deal, and it doesn't have to include that gangster money of key money, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And the other piece of advice I would give for when you're searching for these homes, it's like anything when you're going to purchase anything. It's not in a single moment that you usually find a good house if you're shopping around in your Sikaleo Palace or wherever it is that you're staying. The way that you find a really good place in Japan is by narrowing down the specifics of wherever it is that you want to be, and then religiously checking in every single day to see how that landscape is changing, because things change rapidly. And what you're going to find, of course, is that the best deals get snatched up really quickly. And so if you watch regularly, if you make a note of what is good value, what is bad value, then after a week, after 2 weeks, you're going to know so much better what the ultimate mega deal is for where you're looking, because now you understand in context the sort of cost that you should pay there, what would be a high cost, what would be a low cost, and you can make a really sound decision based on all this information that you've been gathering, because you've been so careful with watching over it. So thorough, I think would be the word as well. And then the actual process usually is, when you have one of these sites, is that there's a number you can phone in and you can register to go and look at the place. After you've made a few appointments, maybe you want to make 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, you go around, you look at the places, and now you're with the real estate company and you're sitting down to discuss the thing. So the one thing, and this saved me a ton of money, it must have saved me something like, around between $500 and $800 when I moved into the place that I'm in currently, was the way that they present it is so predatory. Just because you have great customer service in Japan, don't think that they are above doing some of these shisty sales tricks, which is essentially they'll present you with all the fees for moving in, but they'll often have 2 or 3 fees in there that aren't necessary, but they're just presenting them. It's like, I moved into this place and it was brand new, and they said that there was a thing on there. I was like, what is that? And my friend was like, well, that's the disinfectant fee. And I was like, why in a brand new building am I having to pay a disinfectant fee? And then I checked another fee, and it was something to do with like fire cleaning. That was the other thing that they'd written down there. And so I simply asked the guy, the real estate agent, are these necessary? It was like, oh, no, they're just recommended. So always be sure, if you're going to look up a place to live in Japan, whether the fees that they're presenting you with are necessary fees, or if they're simply recommended fees, and you'll save yourself a ton of money. So there's our two topics to discuss with the beginning of the podcast. Let's move on now. I'm going to go refer to my computer and we'll see what sort of questions we can get through. And today, usually I do a little bit of a pre-read. So we're going in blind today to create some sort of spontaneous reaction to what it is that we're going to read. All right, back at it. So let's jump into my email here. And the first one that we're going to hop into is, the title is ALT Positions for Couples. Doesn't look too long, so I'll be able to read through this one and we'll see where this takes us. Okay, my partner and I currently living and working in South Korea as English teachers in a hagwon, which I imagine is probably like an eikaiwa here in Japan. After doing some research, I figure what we do now is pretty similar to working in an international school, independent teaching school. Our dream is to live and work in Japan and do that together. What's the point if we live apart? That said, I couldn't find much about how to get positions as a couple. Right now, we're lucky enough to teach at the same hagwon. What a sweet name. But it doesn't seem that easy in Japan. From your videos, I know the best option is probably to get a job in an entry place like Interact and then start looking for something better about 6 months in. When we finish our contracts in March, and we'll have 2 years experience. But I'm really interested in teaching an international school. Will my experience be enough to land a job at an international school in Japan for a year? How would you suggest we go about looking as a couple? I think the best way to do this is to basically be upfront about it. Actually, let's put it this way. Like you say, looking for a position as a couple. First, okay, obviously you would want to come at this from two angles. So the first would be, yeah, you're really, really interested in working in the same place together. That's a bit intense for me. That's like your partner like this all the time. But it sounds like these two are deeply in love. So that's okay. So what you would do is, if you found a place that you like, you would both apply at it. And you make it very clear in your application. You're saying, I hope you can take us both on. We also have a work history where we have worked together and it's quite harmonious. Whatever you would want to, however you want to talk about that. And then barring that, because who knows exactly if you can get that gig where they want two people, then the next step would be, if you can live apart from each other for a couple of hours a day, I'd simply look for international schools or schools work opportunities that are in a similar proximity to each other. I mean, if you can both live together and then come home and see each other at night, who knows, maybe this might be a fresh spark to keep that love going a little bit more. Not again to harp on my kind of lifestyle choices, but I would prefer to have a little more time apart from my partner, have your own life. So yeah, I don't think it needs to be any more complex, actually. I think it's more just a question of whether or not you're going to be hired. It's more difficult than if somebody's doing something solo, because you're only responsible to yourself. So apply for whatever place you want to apply for, and apply as the both of you, with that little caveat that you are both applying because you would like to work together and you're a couple, but you've done so in the past. And if that's not exactly going to work out for you, no problem. Then try and look for international schools or whatever that are in close proximity to each other, that it all pans out in the end. I think the biggest thing that you're going to have to do with this case is be patient, because whenever you add on a stipulation for yourself, you're adding time to things being able to work out. You got, like, your experience working over in Korea, you got more than enough teaching experience. Nobody's going to question that. But to find something that's perfectly suited for this kind of specific niche situation, I think that's going to generally take a little bit more time. Maybe you get lucky and it doesn't. But those are my thoughts. Okay, so let's move on. Choices. All right, that's pretty straightforward. Love my opinion. All right, well, let's give it. Got offered a placement with Interact today for 2020. Have an interview with Altia in 10 days. Interact needs an answer in 24 hours. I asked for an extension or decision, but waiting for them to get back to me. Would you hold out for Altia interview or just grab the Interact job? Bullshit, they need an answer within 24 hours. That's what I say to this. Interact has constant positions opening all the time. What they need is for you to, because, okay, all they're doing is prioritizing for this position that would be super convenient for them if they could fill in the next 24 hours and have a answer for. That would be awesome for them, but it's not an absolute in terms of you being hired. What about all the other people who aren't required this 24-hour window to have an answer in? Because I assure you, a lot of people are dealing with Interact for months. People aren't getting their extensions or aren't getting, their placements until they're in Japan. And then when they're in Japan, they're changing. So why would they need an answer within 24 hours? They're strong-arming you because it's convenient for them. This has no overall pressure on whether or not you would actually get the job with them. In this case, if they really wanted to play hard and say like, oh yeah, well then in that case, if you want this extension, then we're not going to hire you. I would say, okay, kick rocks, get out of here. And I would wait for Altia because Altia is better. So I think that's the question here. With ignoring the fact that they don't need 24 hours, then absolutely, I think that you could wait for another 10 days and see what the word is with Altia, because that's such horseshit that they need 24 hours, within 24 hours to make an answer to them. Ha, ridiculous. Would you hold it? Okay, do you think all dispatch companies are much of a muchness? I'm wondering if this is a popular like internet meme right now, because I've had a number of people writing to me using this phrase, much of a muchness. And I'm pretty well connected with the internet. I'm hip, I'm cool, but I haven't seen that before, except it's repeatedly being said to me now by people who I imagine are in different corners of the earth. Okay. That one was dealt with. Oh, Interact and your hilarious pressure you put on people. Totally fabricated. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay. I've been watching videos. Got a question for you. My plan is to move my family to Japan. Okay. I have 2 girls, 9 and 5, and I'm currently homeschooling them. And my husband is a New York City correctional officer. My background is in childcare. I own my own licensed childcare center for 5 years. I taught in Guyana. I'm also a missionary. I did missionary work, and will continue to do work in Japan along with my husband. Neither of us holds any degrees, but I feel we have enough teaching experience to teach English. I love working with children, and I look forward to possible opportunity. My husband makes good money here, so he is hesitant to not leave his job, but because we don't have a degree, he fears he would end up getting deported. I'm struggling because I've been learning the language along with my children. I want to make this work so badly, and I have no intentions of coming back. I want permanent residency. Is this possible? I wonder, Lisa, I didn't use that name. I wonder, Esther, no last name, so you're still good. Why are you so... I would understand the sort of like hopes and dreams mentality of somebody coming to Japan, where more often than not, the reason why they so desire and they must do this is nothing other than they simply feel that way. But I wonder for someone like yourself who has such an established life, why for you this would feel so similar to someone like that, someone who is just on a whim making this decision. So that's a big question here. I wish I understood better why that was. It needs to be taken so much more seriously than what I would say to somebody who's coming over here fresh out of university, because you have 2 children. And then in addition to that, you have a husband who's making good money already, and you're displacing him to bring him over here, where if he doesn't have a degree, is he going to be as satisfied in a position over here as a teacher or something, as he was in a position where he was making more money and probably had more respect and authority? That's a really, really difficult question. So I would come at it from this angle. First of all, the children are actually fine. You guys would come over. But I think what you got to look at, because it sounds like you'll be fine too. It sounds like you have a really good sense of what you want to do if you got here. And you could. You're right. You could absolutely come over here. But I would want for your husband, for your relationship, for your family, to definitely examine what if teaching is not necessarily something that your husband wants to do for the rest of his life. What could he do while he was here to then evolve his contribution to the family? And I've talked about this in a few other videos. You could check some of the more recent ones that I've made, but I think this is what you'd want to definitely look into, either further education that you could evolve the teaching for your husband and yourself, if the teaching thing is what you're doing, but also to look into things like IT opportunities, where if you were to educate yourself through software engineering or through network management, maybe your husband could find an altered position there. So much of life these days for us, not engineer types, it's about having dynamic willingness to continue to educate yourself, but have a plan. Because if you come over here and your husband discovers within a year or two that, oh man, I'm making way less money, I just know how 9 out of 10 guys are going to feel giving up this like greater role that they once had. It'd be horrible. So the person I am most concerned for here is your husband. I know I've said that already, and I can't lay out an exact path for you, but it would be definitely to examine, like I've given you a couple there, whether it's like continue to educate so you can make at least as much money as you made in the teaching industry, or at a turn, maybe there's some interest in information technology that you could get into either software engineering or, as I say, network management. But look at ways that, sure, you're going to be happy, but then don't forget the other member of your family and try and sort something out, because that'll be a demon, that'll be a monkey on your back real fast. And now, where maybe things aren't ideal where you are now, they're going to be a whole lot uglier, where now this situation doesn't work, but you're in a totally foreign country. That's really, really tough. Okay, let's move on. The title of that was Please Help. Next is this guy from Snapchat. Yes, I had somebody message me. Okay, no names. I'll be better this time. So I'm 16 male. I'm from Romania. I speak English and German fluently. Very cool. The school I attend follows the Romanian curriculum, but teaches everything in German. Absolutely everything. I've been studying for 11 years. Wow. Get a certification to prove your fluency, getting a Cambridge certification. I want to go to Japanese minor, major. Okay, where does the question come? As you can see, I'm betting it all on becoming an ALT. Okay, I know you talked about non-native English speakers teaching in Japan, and I know it's technically possible. But since this is the only thing I genuinely want to do, some reassurance would greatly help. Romania has a bad reputation worldwide, so I'm aware of a big disadvantage. That's interesting, talking about the sort of, not even racially, but like what would you call it, like country prejudices that you might find. What are the chances of me actually getting a job as an ALT? How common are apartments like the one you live in right now? Seems ideal. I'm not sure if I want to teach my whole life. I see this as an opportunity to get a visa and a decent paycheck. Once there, I would probably make a living freelancing, getting another job, UX design. There you go, this IT, right? It's amazing. Okay, so you got great opportunities here to get a job. I would say to this email, you have a few of those hiccups in your way, but I don't think when you speak English so fluently that you would have any issue. You're going to have a university degree. That's good as well. That's massively helpful. You would get in, as I've discussed a million times before, into something like a Kiowa. And then, yeah, I would, for yourself, especially for somebody like this, sounds quite ambitious. No problem with like knowledge acquisition and anything. I would say that, yeah, go on to your UX design. You can educate yourself through the internet here while you're doing the teaching gig and, squirreling away your nuts for the winter, saving money. And you'll be rolling in no time. I think you'd be in great shape. Now, as for how common are apartments like the one I live in, they're super common out in the countryside, and they're popping up here and everywhere else. But so my building when I moved in was brand new. It's 52 square meters. Cost of my rent is about 55,000 yen a month. You compare this to anywhere, most places in the city, especially for how old this structure is incredibly affordable. And so the thing to bear in mind is basically location, location, location. So the reason I get this is because I live way out in the middle of fucking nowhere. So that means that I get what I get. Now, if you're in the city, what I would recommend is actually I was talking to my buddy about this recently. If you want to live in Tokyo, look in these areas that are less desirable, because you hear hilarious things like that area is dangerous, and you'll find something like maybe a little smaller than mine, say like 42 square meters as opposed to 52. And it's actually a similar price. The building is going to be older, of course. But that's because of this perceived danger of living in this area, which is, this is funny to me. Japanese dangerous is like compared to, I don't know, I've talked to my buddy specifically for this conversation where he used to live in neighborhoods in the UK, like, it was like West London, where he said you would get like stabbed. And nothing like that happens whatsoever in Tokyo. I think what people perceive as dangerous is maybe like a little bit more run down, but then once you're inside your sweet house that you've got this incredible deal on, it won't really matter what the streets look like outside. So you can find incredible deals in downtown Tokyo if you're willing to look at the slightly less desirable neighborhoods. And like I've been a big advocate of for ages, usually you find something in these places to really enjoy, because people's impressions are made of ideals, and people are like, oh, that's dangerous, but as compared to like the safest place on the entire planet, or oh, that place is run down. Well, compared to what, Roppongi? So all of these opinions are being formulated from an ideal, and ideals usually have ridiculously high standards. I would say delusionally high standards. And so go in and check it out yourself. Go in and check out these less desirable neighborhoods, and you're probably going to find something that suits you, and more that suits you, that you could grow to really, really like, and you're saving a whole bunch of money while you live there. So there you go. There you go, guy from Snapchat. We got to your question finally. All right, moving along. So we're doing pretty good here. Okay, next one. Dream job? ? Would you say teaching in Japan was your dream job? I know how going to Japan was a goal for you, but would any job within reason be okay for you as long as you got a visa and paycheck? I ask because after getting my bachelor's as well, I'm trying out different kinds of jobs and internships. I still don't think I have some field or career I'm definitely passionate about yet. While I hear how much you should love your job, that you can't expect to like every aspect of it, I'm not sure what to do career-wise after I arrive in Japan with the teaching gig. Should I stick to teaching? This is a fantastic question. So absolutely, Japan was my dream job, and the important word there is was. It was given a particular time in my life. I was like, if I could go and live in that foreign country that is so fascinating to me, then teaching would be my dream job. And then once I got here and I discovered that I could get a much better teaching job, that was my dream job. And then I got it. And then once I have this job, now that I've done it for a while, and I have great respect for the Board of Education and the people I work with, but I necessarily, for who I am, require change and to evolve. And so no longer is it my dream job. And this is the thing, I think people to this day have this idea of like career. And I think what career ignores, or like the old way of thinking about it, is that career is like this one specific thing that you do, as opposed to something that is constantly evolving and changing. And that, of course, the latter of those two ideas is the more true, because that's like inherent in the universe: change, growth, entropy. Okay, the last one's a little dark. And if you accept that and go, oh, okay, well, things should evolve, then don't worry that you haven't exactly found the thing that you think of as a career path, because that career path is going to change for you. The way that I look at it is the way that I think is worth looking at it, the perspective I would use is where definitely have an edge. Don't just, I think it would be great as a career path to throw, sunflowers in a field for a day. Like, that's not going to really help you. You still need to be conscientious of making decisions that can support yourself, but make a decision with an edge when you're like, that really does further me. That one really does allow me to further express, further involve myself with the things that I'm passionate about, but let it fulfill that role so far as that's the thing that you can immediately attain. And then as soon as you get it, don't be worried about the dissatisfaction you might feel in a year or two that you want to change again. Just look for the next thing that gives you an edge, the next thing that levels you up, that lets you more so do even more the things that you love to be a part of. And if you follow that course, you'll stay inspired, you'll stay engaged, and the thing that will keep the existential wolves from the door is that you'll have a purpose. Purpose is paramount to not becoming a depressed, existentially lost individual. And that comes from setting the new target, looking at the next horizon, and not actually worrying the fact that you keep moving the goalposts. I think moving the goalpost is actually what keeps us happy in the end. It keeps us moving forward. Live forward is what I would say. Now, unsure teacher. That's a great name for that. Okay. Now let's do one more. We'll do one more question here. Okay. Fan of the channel. Love the podcast. Right on. Glad you do. Thank you very much. Okay. 22-year-old American male here. Half white, half Mexican. And I've been getting my start in the the definite article world, mostly on the A+ side, but I'm currently working N+ and CCNA. These are all just technical things for people listening. It's all good if you don't know. I do not have anything above an associate degree. Doesn't matter. I've always been interested in moving to Japan and heard that IT market is quite lucrative. It most certainly is. I'm also open to teaching as well. My only real hang up is that I have a lot of tattoos. Okay, sure. Nothing inappropriate or visible with a long sleeve shirt on, and I'm worried about how that might impact my work if I go there. Meh, not at all. Let's lay this one to rest. Unless you had facial tattoos, as long as you can hide your tattoos, then there's no real issue at all, aside from onsens, in which case it will almost always be an issue at a big public onsen. My friend has 3 or 4 tattoos on his body, and we just put workout tape on wherever it is that we need to cover him up if he goes to an onsen. So there's even a workaround there. The only thing, and again, at school, it wouldn't be an issue. You go out, say you had to do like a pool day or something, you can throw a shirt on. Nobody needs to see the tattoos. It is a legitimate concern, though, because it's so popularly known as a negative thing in Japan. So popularly known, though. On the ground, it's not so bad. That's the point that I'm making here. So you wouldn't really have to worry about that. And yeah, all the more power to you. You're going to have to do this sort of like inadvertent route into teaching if you want to do it. We've discussed this many times. But if you are really developing your skill set with IT and networking, then you're going to have no problem whatsoever finding a very quite lucrative, that's an interesting phrase, position here when you're working in Japan. So don't sweat it. You'll do quite well, I think. Right then, Thank you very much, everyone, for watching or listening, depending on where it is that you're tuning in from. I really appreciate it. If you would, as I mentioned at the beginning, like to have your question guaranteed answered on the podcast, please do consider supporting me at Patreon for as low as $1 and all the other extra goodies that you get on there. Feel free to leave a comment on this if you're at the YouTube channel. I'll try and directly answer those there. But yes, write me at davetripanon@gmail.com if you want to have like this full explanation that we've done. Yes, please do like, comment, subscribe. YouTuber words. I really appreciate you guys. You're awesome. Thanks for tuning in. I really enjoyed this one, very much like the last one. There was some magic in these last 2 episodes. Let's see if we can't keep it up. The clock has run out for now. Peace.